All right, thanks very much, Jen, and thanks everybody for joining our session today. Today, we're going to be taking you through quite a few different topics that should be top of mind for anybody who's considering a connectivity project or anyone who's just generally interested in, learning more about what's out there in the market for connectivity methods. These include, the connectivity methods themselves, overall strategies, any sort of considerations, both organizational and external, and really a few other topics related to formats and some coming to market type technologies in the connectivity space. So excited to lead you through this conversation here today. But before we jump into the content, why don't we just quickly introduce some of the speakers here so you have a chance to get to know us a little bit better. I'm John Piquet. I'm VP Solutions for TIS's US market. So I've been with the organization since 2019. And in my role, I oversee the solutions architects team, our customer onboarding function, and some of our partner engagement onboarding functions as well. So Jacques, why don't I hand to you as well to introduce yourself here?
Thank you, John, and also welcome from my side, Jacques Liana. I am actually Director of Pre-Sales Consulting EMEA with TIS. That means I'm actually talking to prospects and also explain them what can be the value added for them into working together with TIS. So I will be very delighted today to go through some specific aspect related to connectivity and integrations. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And also, Errol, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, last but not least, Errol, CPO and co-founder of TIS. I'm really curious about today's webinar about APIs connectivity. It's a crucial part of what we do. So looking forward for a great webinar with you.
All right, thanks very much, guys. And just for everybody on the line here, just to give you the lay of the land, so to speak, on what we're going to talk about during the conversation here today, we'll focus on, setting the stage. What are really the variables to consider when you're assessing bank connectivity? What are the pain points? Historically, why has this been such a difficult topic for organizations to assess well? Evolution, what has happened to connectivity options? How have they evolved over time, specifically to solve some of these pain points? The current state in terms of what a modern enterprise connectivity structure would look like. Future state, with the forward-looking type technologies, things like bank APIs that organizations should keep in mind as they're sort of future-proofing themselves or, putting into place a structure that will work well for the future as well. As I mentioned, we're going to bring in some of these format considerations too. It's not just, how you're connecting with your banking partners, but also how you're passing information back and forth to them. We definitely want to highlight the importance of, particularly ISO 20022 from that respect. We'll round out the conversation here with some points around APIs. Definitely a hot topic in the market, right? I think a lot of organizations are interested to learn more about how they're being used today and how they might be used in the future. And then finally, we'll give you some final thoughts, just some key takeaways, the highlights from the conversation for the topics that we went through here today. And we'll end here today with hopefully about 10 to 15 minutes left for a Q&A session. So, if you do have any questions during the course of the session, feel free to just type those directly into the chat box. We'll try to get to most, if not all, of those questions at the end of the session. So with that, let's jump right in here. And Jack, maybe I'll hand to you so you can take us through some of the key considerations in modern day bank connectivity.
Yes, thank you, John. It's very important actually to understand when we talk about modern day bank connectivity, where we stand today. And that means which market corporate are doing business is very important because it's also subject to jurisdictional aspect. That means at the end of the day that you have to orient your procure to pay on order to cash with respect to the local market requirements and therefore connect to the bank in these processes. You can only connect to those banks if there are capability at this local level to use some connectivity options. In this case, out there in the market, you have several one. We have the standard host-to-host connectivity options. We have the open APIs, very, very fast growing. John and Errol will come back again on this topic later. We have Swift, which is a very traditional means of reaching and connecting to bank in an international context, and we have some regional connectivity options. So you cannot reach a channel without a specific message, and this message is exactly what the bank understands through the channels. And therefore, when you, depending on the channel that you use, you have to use some message. And currently, Swift, for example, is using the MT1. message, we have the ISO XML, which is also used in Swift, but also in other connectivity options. So you have this kind of mix of regional and standard within the Swift format. All of that depend on your environment in your corporate, which means which back office system you have is what actually the back end system, the ERP system can deliver, and how complex this is set up. And the whole of that creates a kind of complexity already within the whole market that you try to centralize in order to have a clear view on what is going on in your payments and connectivity to banks. This leads maybe to go back in the wish to centralize these and address the complexity. And maybe in the next slide, John, we can show exactly how complex the environment is. The environment is becoming complex. For example, if you decide to go externally in other markets through acquisitions, or you have already your footprint in several markets. In this case, you have generally different ERP systems. Those systems are used for doing payments, support the procure to pay process and the order to cash. But not only those systems, you also have within your organization different functions, and those support functions have to communicate. Unfortunately, it's not usual that a lot of corporate already have integrated system in this whole architecture, and therefore there's kind of silo between functions that appear. So HR, when it comes to payroll, speak its own language. Treasury address only financing and money market topic. Accounting is stressing to get a very good master data and also do payment in a good way. And procurement is also struggling to get the whole information. So today, connecting all these complex environments, it's becoming easier. It's becoming easier because of the innovation out there in the market, because of corporate like TIS maybe making easy for you to have a platform which can help you to connect to those systems and also address the topic of the format of the message between those systems. So when we go to the next slide, John, we can see exactly how that can look like in the future. So in the modern world, you do not want to have different systems not interconnected and a corporate function that actually do not have a very integrated part, but has kind of silo, and you have challenges to digest the data and also take strategic decisions. So in the modern world, you try to have kind of single point of truth and also a single gateway to banks. And that means the single point of truth integrate your back-end system, your back office. We can be actually your ERP system or other treasury management system that you have, or other system that you use to do your back-end operations. And then through these integrations, you have one single point of contact and gateway to the banks. This aspect is very important because it's exactly where you can implement your compliance topic. You can control, but at the same time, decentralize your processes. That is very important. You can support the connectivity option toward the banks. That means this single point of contact and truth is the one managing the complexity when it comes to format. And because you have this gateway, you can then have other instruments like fraud related for fraud mitigations. Security is centralized. You have the governance that you can put in place, and you have the full visibility because the cash out is within one channel. And of course, on the other side of the whole picture, you have the banks. Depending on the market you are, there might be different requirements. And those requirements are important to be met on the regional level, but at the same time, reduce the complexity for your operations. It's not about complexity on demand, it's about simplicity on demand. It's about focusing on what you are good at and giving to partners the opportunity to help you to address the challenges when it comes to connectivities. And in that regard, it's important to have partners who can actually address those worldwide use message channels. It's what we say before, Swift, host to host, or ABIX for regional channels, and a very, very important aspect for tomorrow and already today, open APIs. To understand the storyline, it's important to go back in the past and see how the future will look like. And in that regard, I will hand over to John. Maybe he has a better view on the storyline from the past through the future.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. And that's definitely helpful information about the complexities organizations are dealing with and how they might be able to, sort of, simplify some of those complexities in their connectivity structure. I know you're going to talk a little bit later on about each one of those connectivity methods you mentioned before too, host-to-host, Swift, APIs, and things like that. So we'll definitely bring more context into that topic later on. But we thought it'd be interesting to sort of take you through a timeline of how connectivity has evolved, sort of over time here. Looking back to 1977, which was actually when Swift was first enacted, which is sort of crazy to think about that it goes back that far, right? So it was obviously not the Swift you think about today. As of the end of the 1970s, there were only about 10 million messages flowing through the Swift network in about 15 different countries. So you fast forward to 2005, which is when SwiftNet was introduced, or at least that's when Swift migrated to the SwiftNet infrastructure, which is sort of the more common way people think about Swift today. And by the end of that time period, about 2009, the messaging volumes had jumped to about 4 billion, and they were passing messages in about 210 different countries worldwide. So obviously that connectivity method continues to evolve over time, and Swift continues to be an innovator and a major player in the market. But yeah, it all kind of started back in 1977 to kind of set this whole thing in motion. You go into the 1990s, and that's when you start to see some other methods of interacting with your banks start to emerge. You have, host-to-host connections, which is, a common way for organizations to connect with their banks today. Probably the most common way still, to connect with your banks via host-to-host is through an SFTP connection. SFTP was actually invented in 1998, I believe it was, right? So, and then more broadly adopted by banks just after the tick of the 2000s here. So just about 20 years, it's kind of remained the kind of the predominant way to connect with your banks via host-to-host connection, which I thought was interesting as well. And bank portals started to emerge in the 90s as well. 1995 to the end of that sort of decade there is probably where you saw most banks begin to introduce their online banking offering. I can speak specifically to the States. I know that Wells Fargo was one of the banks that was an early adopter for online banking portals, followed pretty closely by Citibank and JP Morgan and the other major banks in our region, really towards the late 90s, right? And that kind of revolutionized the way that at least corporate treasury interacted with their banks and was able to pull information. Although it was manual, it was at least accessible, right, online, which was a major thing. And then some of the more key, current key milestones to keep in mind here, ISO 20022, which is, it's not a connectivity method, it's a messaging standard, right? But really what it looks to do is standardize the way different financial organizations and corporates are interacting with each other within these different connectivity methods, right? To kind of bring some simplicity to that. That's a topic we're going to talk about a little bit more over the next couple slides here. But in general, ISO 20022 was first introduced back in, I believe it was 2004. So, so it's starting to gain more broad adoption during the later 2000 eras. And really, a milestone that to keep in mind here is by 2025, Swift is going to require all banks within its network to be able to send and receive ISO messages. So that's a good, 20-year period as well that you're looking at adoption of this particular standard. You can kind of see a trend here. It takes a while for some of these technologies to kind of reach full maturity, right? Before they're being fully utilized by corporates. And then open banking APIs is probably the other big topic. I think of 2021 as really being the year of the open banking API. It's when it really started to get a lot of attention. But you can, though APIs have been around forever, you can kind of tie, at least open banking APIs the way we think of them to a couple major events. There's the European Payment Services Directive, PSD1, which was enacted in 2007, was a major milestone, I think. It sort of set the stage for banks beginning to open up their architectures and allow, fintechs to implement things like APIs, and really wanted to drive innovation in this market more so, right, beyond what the banks could develop. And then more so, I think PSD2, which I believe was formalized in 2018, is really what set the stage for how we think about open banking APIs today, I think, right? So also a relatively new topic here. Over the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on ISO 20022 and mainly open banking APIs as well, and just give you some additional information about these two topics. So first of all, ISO 20022, kind of a mini timeline here. We'll present this one, and then we'll kind of drop the timeline topic here and move on to some other topics. But here we are now, 2022, where ISO is really coexisting alongside many other different formats. Those involve MT messages, which are most commonly transmitted through SWIFT, but they also involve regional formats, things like, people are probably familiar with NACHA, a way to execute ACH payments in the US, or BACS to do domestic payments in the UK, CPA for Canada, on and on, right? So it's kind of a mix of formats right now being used by corporates. As mentioned on the last slide, by 2025, really SWIFT is going to require all of its member banks to be able to send and receive these messages, these ISO messages. That being said, I think that if you go to the banking market today and you sort of evaluate the capabilities of most of the major banks, most have already migrated to ISO standards, or at least offer that alongside other standards, right? So it is already an ongoing migration, although this 2025 deadline has been set here. And then really the right side of this, don't need to spend a ton of time on it. It's more driven around or based around driving corporate adoption of the ISO standard, the education programs that are going to be in place, and ultimately what will facilitate the full migration to ISO 20022 for corporates by hopefully, what's a soft deadline, but 2030. So that being said, it is already being adopted, ISO 20022, broadly by organizations. Some of these statistics are a couple of years old, but as of 2009, there were already 2.5 billion ISO messages being sent through financial messaging networks. Comparatively, there were 8.5 million MT messages, so ISO still only has about a quarter of the volume, but still pretty good adoption. Keeping in mind that 2025 deadline is still a ways out in the future here. About 80% of corporates were using MT messaging formats, and about 40% using ISO standard formats. So still, you're seeing a lot of organizations really kind of be proactive about adoption of this messaging standard. So begs the question, why? Why are people so, I guess, encouraged to use these types of formats? I think there's, maybe a couple different things in the market that might be driving that. First of all, I think, generally, fintechs are lowering the barrier to entry for the ISO formats. So if you're utilizing something like, or if you're implementing something like a payments hub or a treasury aggregator type software, a lot of times that makes it really easy to kind of migrate over to the ISO standards, because even if you're still using legacy formats from your ERP systems, things like NACHA formatted files, MT formatted files, the fintech itself can convert those files into ISO standard files, right? PAIN 001 payment initiation files, without needing to necessarily contemplate that within the backend system. And then you can take advantage of all the efficiencies that come with ISO messaging standards, the data robustness, which we'll actually talk about a bit more on the next slide here, as well as real-time confirmation. So one thing that a lot of corporates like to take advantage of with ISO messaging formats is if you send a payment initiation file, PAIN 001 formatted file, you automatically get back a PAIN 002 acknowledgement that indicates the success or any problems with those particular payment files, right? Which is a big change from a lot of the legacy formats that that might have been used in the past. And I think that another thing that's really driving fast adoption of ISO 20022 is that technology adoption in general is increasing as well. And I think people want to future-proof themselves. You don't want to implement a format that's legacy and will eventually in the future be replaced by something better. So it's just sort of an eye towards the future and recognizing both the benefits and the best ways to future-proof yourself. But that being said, I think the data richness of this format is really probably the most major thing that's driving organizations to want to migrate to ISO sooner rather than later. And this is sort of a technically dense slide here, but maybe I can explain this in very simple terms and give you a better sense of what exactly ISO 20022 is. So, a few slides ago, I mentioned that it is a messaging standard that aims to simplify and standardize the communications between financial institutions. What I mean by that is that essentially the way that ISO works is that certain key information is always communicated consistently in the same tag. And so, on the right-hand side here, you're looking at an XML tree. This is, a PAIN 001 credit initiation file. And take a very simple example of that. Any payment initiation file is going to have a beneficiary name, a beneficiary account number, beneficiary bank identification information, right? And the way that ISO works is that it always places those pieces of information in the exact same, what's called a tag, right? These sort of, different tags you see here on the screen on the right-hand side. So that when you're passing messages, whether it be in the US, Europe, Asia, wherever it might be, right? You're always passing that information consistently in the same tag, and everybody can kind of, communicate with the same language. The complexity comes that every single bank expects different tags in their file, right? So everybody has a different structure that they're expecting, different pieces of information within the file itself, which is something that fintechs can solve for you as well, right? By kind of doing that interpretation for you of what information is necessary, not necessary. But even just this sort of standardization of how information is structured within a file is a real game changer for organizations. The example that's up here on the screen is actually related to remittance information. So if you look on the left-hand side here, you have an MT101 message. If you were to think about how remittance information is typically communicated in that form of a payment file, you have your what's called a tag 70, right? Which is where you put all your remittance information in there. That's your invoice amount, your invoice number, right? The invoice date, the type of invoice, a credit note, if one might exist. All kind of goes in that as one string of text. If you look at, by comparison, an ISO structured message, each one of those data elements has its own tag. So the type of invoice is communicated in one tag, the invoice number is communicated in another tag. If there's a structured communication reference, that's communicated in its own tag. So if you think about, and all this information ultimately passes to the bank report. So when you get your ISO XML structured reporting file, you have the same organization of the information in an ISO message. And why that's important is if you think about how the ERP ultimately receives this information, or any sort of reconciliation type platform, imagine that system needing to hunt through that field 70 of the MT101 message to pick out all the critical pieces of information that you need to automate your cash applications process or your reconciliation process. That's not an easy task, right? But if you look at an ISO message and all that information is going to be displayed in individual segments that are clearly labeled, clearly differentiated, and that those segments are always going to be the same globally because it's a global standard, right? That's what ISO hopes to do for the market. Then you can really get more sophisticated about how you write these reconciliation rules and how ultimately your systems receive these information. And so, long story short here, probably the main reason that I think most corporates are looking to take advantage of ISO today is for these reasons. It's to increase their cash applications automation rate, right? It's to get more standardized about how the way they're doing payment initiations globally. And if you're of the mindset that you want to drive automation and standardization within your organization, ISO is definitely the format for you. So it's a very exciting thing that's happening in the market. It's something we definitely wanted to highlight here today. If you are interested in this topic, we have loads of content on it on the TIS website actually, and we're also happy to connect offline or chat about it a little bit further. But for the sake of time here, I am going to move on from this topic and transition over to the API topic, which is another very popular one in the market. A few slides ago, I mentioned as well that I think 2021 was really the year of the API. It's really when it started to take flight, and when you started to see a lot of corporate interest in utilizing bank APIs. What you're looking at on the screen right here is a survey that we actually launched towards the end of 2021. It was forward-looking. It was, what sorts of technologies are organizations most interested in implementing in 2022? Of course, what came out there was bank APIs, right? It's one of those topics, it's one of the amongst others, but definitely one of the one of the major ones. And this graph here just sort of slices that data in a more granular level to explain what types of APIs corporates were most interested in. So, really the key findings from this survey are about 75% of the respondents here plan to implement bank APIs in 2022, right? And within that 75%, 35% plan to implement APIs for both payments and balance reporting during the course of the year. So I thought this was very, very interesting. Obviously, first of all, it just speaks, I think, immensely to the interest of this topic within the market. But the thing that we always caution is that you have to keep in mind, sort of where APIs sit. Just like that technology curve, that I showed you a while back with Swift starting in 1977 and really not reaching fruition until the 2000s, you kind of have to think about APIs in the same way. And tie the maturity of those APIs to actual business functions. And that's what we're always helping our customers to do. And there are certainly banks and regions across the world that are probably more mature from an API standpoint and are able to really facilitate some advanced capabilities. And there are others that aren't as much, and that's probably a piece of knowledge that's at times probably missing in the market and something we definitely try to bring into our customer engagements. So just to give you kind of a sense of what I mean by this is so I know I could speak to the US specifically, which is probably slightly further behind on API maturity than our European colleagues, mainly because we didn't have regulatory mandates like PSD2 here, right? We didn't have the government telling us to open up the architectures and allow more robust communication and drive innovation in the market. It was done through market momentum, which is there, which you can see with 75% of the corporates kind of pushing this topic. But where it kind of left us is that we have probably in most cases really mature or somewhat mature APIs for balance reporting, and from a payment standpoint, maybe not quite there yet. A lot of the times what we hear about payments APIs in the US, the only thing that they really facilitate at this particular moment are one-off payment initiations, which might work well for organizations if that's really what you're trying to facilitate. It's just API initiation of one-off payments. But if you're looking at something like standardizing your global AP process, you're going to want to pass large batch files, right? Batches of 200, 300 different transactions. And you have to really consider if the maturity of the APIs that you want to use are actually facilitating that. Can they actually facilitate that sort of information transfer or not, right? So those are the key considerations that you definitely need to keep in mind. But that being said, it certainly is the wave of the future and something that we're really keeping a close eye on. By comparison, I mentioned Europe's probably a little bit further along for APIs. There are a lot of banks, in Northern Europe or even the Nordics that have really mature bank APIs that can facilitate all sorts of great things and, really can be used across the board for batch payment initiation and reporting and things like that, right? So it really just varies region to region, bank to bank. But definitely, don't take that blanket assumption that APIs are for you right now. They may be, they may not be, and definitely consult with somebody who will sort of guide you through those decisions, right, as you're making decisions about bank APIs. And so, on this one too, Errol, if you don't mind, I might bring you in here a little bit just to maybe chat about bank APIs a bit, as you're our sort of resident expert here on this topic. So, wondering if you have any sort of different perception of this particular topic.
Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome how you explained it, and yeah, the statistics just showed how mature this topic became. Yeah, and so 75% are really willing to implement or using it or creating a competency around this. That's a great story, actually, or it's a great message. I think from a maturity perspective, yes, in the US, banking APIs are not really mature enough, but when it comes to API as such, I will talk a little bit later also about this. This is quite mature, actually, the technology standpoint and the cloud technology, API technology, how best of breed is used in these type of markets. Maybe not necessarily in the financial world, but in other industries, this is heavily already became a standard, became reality. Yeah, so actually that's a great message, and we will see more and more adoption of APIs and more to come, so to speak. And I think the innovation will be increased exponentially when more and more, let's say, parts of the puzzle will suddenly fit together. And so more to come, I think.
No, agreed. Yeah, thank you for that insight there. So, I mean, you brought up a great point. It's the exciting thing is the amount of momentum the topic has. So it's really, what's interesting about APIs, I think, to me, is that the market is pushing this topic so much, right? They're pushing the banks and the fintechs, together to get more innovative and to offer better functionality as it pertains to bank APIs, which is just ideal. I know for us to hear specifically what the market is looking to do and then to get that sort of direct feedback. And, it's great for innovation because, it kind of pushes everybody involved there to move in the right direction. So this is exactly kind of what this slide here highlights is, what is driving all the momentum around APIs? And these are some results that came from a 2019 CGI and Global Treasurer survey. So first you have the corporate challenges, the need for real-time data, especially bank reporting, right? So I think fundamentally, definitely in the US, but I think globally, cash management is changing a bit and becoming a lot more real-time. This was driven by, I think, a few different factors, but I think the pandemic definitely accelerated this a bit, where, organizations were probably looking a lot more day to day to see, hey, what's coming in for cash, what's going out for cash, where things got so unpredictable. So that's yet another factor that's really driving and pushing this API topic in the market more quickly. But yeah, it's clear that, the average corporate treasurer is looking to be a lot more strategic than previously. Your forecasting is now becoming sort of a real-time activity versus, a weekly report that you create. And then organizations are looking to derive real business insights from those forecasts so they can act within the day to make strategic decisions that ultimately, impact the business, either investing or paying down debt or whatever it might be within your business. To a lesser extent, there's a lot of interest in real-time reconciliation, which APIs can also facilitate, right? Real-time cash applications. And there's a perception too that APIs will ease the historical integration products through banking providers as well, right? So people are interested in seeing how APIs can sort of get them up and running quicker, I think, by and large too. And then you have the bank topics that are driving this as well. If you think about banks, particularly in the US, a lot have grown by acquisition over the year, right? You have, or over the years, you have, major banks that have acquired regional banks to ultimately become the kind of mega players in the market that they have become. But, en route to doing that, a lot of their technologies become really fragmented. So you have multiple different platforms that kind of came on board at different states during that acquisition period. And that's noticeable in some respect to the customers. I'm sure there's probably even people on the line who have run into instances where they found out that, hey, half your accounts for this particular bank are hosted on this platform, this legacy system for this particular banking partner, and the other half are hosted on another one, and there's no way to combine those two. And banks kind of understand that as well, right? I think they see the promise that APIs have to kind of simplify that for them. Allowing more innovative players in the market like fintechs to be able to reach in and pull that data rather than relying on these systems that might be fragmented on the back end, right? So solves a lot of those types of challenges for the banking partners as well. And by and large, there's really a mindset shift in the market, I think, where banks no longer view fintechs as competitors, really. Historically, it's been banks have wanted to keep their customers on their platforms, because they feel like that's how they keep the business, right? Keep you within their ecosystem. So they're going to develop technologies and sort of try to keep everybody, on their proprietary platforms. And most have thrown that out the window at this point, and they're more so seeing the value that they can provide to their customers by being more innovative, developing things quicker in combination with fintechs, and honestly, from providing solutions that are bank agnostic, so they're not sort of trapping people in these historical organizational type, silos from the old mindset. They're more opening up this world so that their customers can utilize their solutions more universally. So all very exciting things happening in the market. Like I said, what's great about APIs is it's not like the fintechs have developed these capabilities and they're trying to push them out to everybody. The momentum is all from within, and so that's driving a lot of innovation in this space. And I think while you'll see such great advancements in the maturity of the APIs during the course of 2022, and 2022 could actually really be the year that APIs really take flight from both a reporting and payment standpoint. So it should be exciting things to see. All right, and so with that, we will hand over to Errol here, just to talk a little bit more generally about API technology and really what it's facilitating in the market today.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. Key message actually in this slide is we are surrounded by APIs even today, already today. Be it because you're integrating your vendors, your partners, or because you capture market data from external platforms or integrating with financial institutions for payments, whatever. The world has moved since a couple of years from closed world and proprietary, let's say, peer-to-peer connectivity to a more open and better standardized managed integration. And an API became the digital glue actually for you and your ecosystem. So I really think APIs are a key driver of the digital transformation of many industries actually. So there's a clear reason for that. And if you ask you why, and there's, let's say, one thing is technology and the maturity of the technology, clearly driven by cloud technology from the first generation, let's say RPC calls, like function calls, to web services, service-oriented architectures, and then these days we're talking about REST APIs. Actually, it's an easy to consume and implement, application programming interface. And the key result of this maturity is actually the simplicity. It was never ever so easy to programmatically integrate two computer programs. Yeah, so it's the simplicity now of the technology, the maturity of it. And secondly, it's the availability of APIs. Since 2005, we have seen APIs grow from a curiosity to a trend, and now it became, a core to many businesses, actually. And in the past few years, we have even, if you look at the fastest growing API categories, you will see that actually financial services related categories have always been ranked highly. So it's not a surprise. It's just because Jonathan also talked about this open banking initiative and the rise of digital forms of payments, the need for real-time market information. All these were driving factors for APIs in the financial domain. And these days, it is the most attractive space for developers, actually. For fintech APIs, so to speak. The third thing is it's a paradigm shift from, I would say, monolithical suite thinking to flexible best of breed thinking, and that's basically the key drivers, what I say, for APIs. So what does that mean for you or for us? And I think does it mean you need to be an expert in APIs? Does it mean you have to implement APIs for your own business or so? Now, as a treasurer or someone in the financial domain of corporates, you should not be just interested in the APIs. You should create competency about this topic. And you should bother, because corporate treasury is one of the most of these functions who sits in between, and then he has a 360-degree touch point to the internal ecosystem and the external ecosystem, right? And so with connectivity, you embed yourself as a function in the whole. And so I think you have to create market competency, know why APIs make sense or not, and how they can create value for you. Sooner or later, you will be impacted by this. It is not a question whether or not, it's just a question about when.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Errol. As we kind of continue our conversation here, Jacques, I want to bring you back in for sure here, maybe to talk a little bit about the different types of connectivity methods that exist out there. So maybe kind of bring a lot of these concepts together. We've talked about, I think we've hit on each one of these individually during the course of the conversation, but if you were about to speak in them in aggregate, maybe you can give us just a handful of good points here to keep in mind as you're assessing the mix of connectivity methods you might put in place.
Yes, thanks, John. This slide is very important, especially because we always have a lot of prospect customer asking us, what is the best connectivity option, the easy one for them, and what exactly the market is driving at when it comes to connectivity option, kind of bringing them the comparison of what is out there. The message is always the same. We cannot give you a strong opinion on any connectivity option for one reason. Your banking wallet and your banking relations is the key. And that means the the relationship that you have with your bank actually is the very important factor defining the connectivity option that you would actually choose for you. There is no such kind of best options. Everything is always specific to your own challenges at a certain moment. And like Errol and John already say, the trend here is on API. At the same time, we have Swift still there, and we have on specific market due to technological challenges, local format still remaining. So the popularity of format, like it's actually displayed here, it's clear. It's very high when it comes to Swift still. We have an average because of kind of momentum and growth when it comes to Open API. We have high popularity when it comes to local format. Think about in the DAR regions or in the UK or in the US, still local format use. We have also high attractiveness when it comes to host to host, which is actually used also worldwide. But how the future look like, it's clear. We have a really growing attractiveness toward the open APIs. We have kind of statical when it comes to local format and host to host. Why when it comes to Swift, it's kind of declining actually, to put it that way. And that is also the reason why ISO is becoming also interesting, also on Swift level. Then the coverage, it's also clear. We have a global for Swift, which is also one of the most global connectivity options used today, for sure. We have API starting to going also very global, still depending on the innovation or the infrastructure of the bank wherever they are doing business. We have host to host, which is also depending on the bank. And that you can also see it when it comes to documentation. It's always kind of standard and bank specific or standards. And we have also on the ABIX the same trend, which is actually not global, but still regional, with some development when it comes to the OPAC regions also coming. The standardizations when it comes to connectivity option is very high for at the Swift level. We're talking about empty message, which is they are empty standards. So it's clear. And then we go into a very low standardization when it comes to API. There are several discussions on keeping that standardized in the future, still in discussion. We have a high standard when it comes to regional connectivity options and very low on host-to-host level. In general, we need to be very careful when it comes to cost on connectivity. And that is exactly what I said in the beginning, it depends on your banking relationship. But for sure, connectivity seems to be high on Swift because of documentation behind this, the whole standardization cost, and also the type of message that you use. The empty message is, of course, a high volume and a high value standard message, and therefore has its price. We have an average cost when it comes to API and host to host, while local standard, it's clear, it's local, seems to be low. But this is only a view, which is very general. We have corporate having the other way around, very low on API and very low on host to host. So it's only a general view that we put here. The documentation, as I said before, is standard for Swift, bank specific into API. There's a need maybe to consolidate this part. We have standard when it comes to local connectivity options, and our host to host, we have again bank specific host to host requirements. So I think that is a very brief resume of what is out there. And I don't know if John, you would like to add something, or Errol, but I think for me it gives a very clear picture of the whole.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great overview. I mean, it's always the million-dollar question to try to answer. What is the best connectivity method out there for connecting with your banks? There's just, unfortunately, there's no clear answer to that. And I think it goes back to, tying what you're using for bank connectivity method to your actual operational processes in terms of what you're looking to achieve, right? I think a lot of senses that's going to drive your decision. And in some cases, it's more, I guess, organizational topics as well. You made good points, I think, Jack, about Swift, in terms of, documentation, but also in terms of their ongoing audit requirements, the CSP program, those types of requirements as well. Do you have the right resources inside to sort of maintain some of those administrative components, or would you rather go with something that is, more direct between you and the bank without a third party involved? Those are the things to think about as well. Certainly APIs, right? Are your near-term challenges really around real-time cache visibility and a lot of things that APIs can solve for today, or are they more around global standardization, and those are other considerations to bring into. So if it does seem to the group that we're not giving a very clear answer on what's better, that's the reason why, really. And these are exactly the types of conversations I think that we're typically having with our customers on a day-to-day basis, is to just really look into their processes and advise them on what the best way to connect up with their banking partners is, and also what to look forward to, to kind of keep those connection methods future-proof, both from a connectivity method standpoint and also from a formats and data transfer type standpoint as well. So hopefully this is a good overview though, Jack. Thanks a lot here. I know that you did give us some great insight into each one of these really key categories to consider for each one of these connectivity methods. So I definitely appreciate that.
Maybe just maybe just one comment on that. Yeah, that's as you said, it depends always. Yeah, what is the best for the particular situation or for a customer. What is key is to be flexible here and to be able to capture innovation early enough. Sometimes good enough, it's also okay to say, okay, we go with Swift in certain areas because the global reach of certain banks are only guaranteed via Swift, as an example, or some other specific requirements that you have for reconciliation. Probably a host-to-host connection does not make any sense. That's why you have to go with a specific API for a bank. So important is you of course you have the choice, but you need the flexibility first to have a choice. And so that means at the end, it makes sense not to have, let's say, direct connectivities with those and implement, but rather having kind of like a central hub or maybe more a central hub where you can really adapt your environment or the connectivity based on your needs. So that's basically, I think, the key message here for also in this slide.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Errol, for that insight too. And I think that kind of brings us into our key takeaways. And the first one here is, I think, dovetails nicely into exactly what you just said, Errol. It's find the right mix. First of all, it could be that you're utilizing multiple different connectivity methods to connect up with your banking partners, but that doesn't mean it necessarily has to be complex. If you've centralized that through a hub, the mix is kind of on your provider there to be able to manage those different protocols between your banking partners. And then to you, it's just one connection to that hub, right? So if your organization is looking to move towards a API-based strategy going forward, you could put that in place today with the hub itself, and then still, even if the underlying connectivity methods with those banking partners is a mix, some APIs, some Swift, some host-to-host, whatever it might be, that's somewhat invisible, right, from the integration standpoint at least. So there are good strategies here to, I guess, both find the right mix and kind of prepare yourself for the future as well, right? So this is kind of our key takeaway here, number two. One point of this is definitely around being aware of some of these new standards that are coming to market here, particularly ISO 20022, since adoption is ramping up so quickly here, and the benefits for organizations in terms of the data robustness are enormous, and a lot of looking to take advantage of it. So definitely keep that in mind as you're preparing for the future and how you're building both your connectivity with your banks in terms of the messaging that you're receiving through those connection methods, and ultimately how that's getting into your back office system to facilitate what everybody wants to accomplish, which is more efficient back office processes driven by this bank connectivity. And likewise, APIs, they will definitely, I think we all agree they'll be the wave of the future, and definitely heading in that direction quickly, mainly driven by momentum within the market and the banks themselves, which is great. So definitely be aware of APIs and sort of where they fit into your landscape today, and how to sort of integrate these into your connectivity strategy as you kind of move forward here. And then, Jax, maybe I'll hand to you here to talk a little bit about weighing the cost of the different connectivity methods.
Yeah, this part is very interesting for treasurer in general, or for CFO. How much money it costs to me to have which connectivity options? Like I said before, it's a question of a bank relationship, and if you know that on your relationship counterparty, the connectivity is less complicated, or the fee are low on the message type or the project implementation type, then you might decide to go for one. What is important is just to make sure that you put together which cost come to you for deciding to choose one connectivity, and also not the cost in euro or dollars, but also the time related to these connectivity. We're talking about opportunity cost in this case. Are there third party involved? Which kind of what will take the connectivity to be in place when it comes to resources and the time, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, we always analyze at TIS with the customer which option makes sense. We give advice as to what will be less complex with respect to the architecture, the structure of the corporate. So there is no such a magic standard cost that you will have in place. You have always to weigh the whole picture of the project.
Great. Thanks, Jack. And Errol, maybe we'll give the last word to you here, if you'd like it, on just sort of maintaining flexibility within your connectivity structure.
Exactly. I mean, that's the key message. The world is complex. We can make it simpler if you have the right architecture.
Very well said, and simply as well. So, all right, great, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation today, and some of the topics we took you through here. We just have a few other sort of resources that you could access here on this last slide if you are interested in learning more about any of these topics in general: connectivity, ISO, APIs, whatever it might be. There's loads of information that we're publishing constantly about these particular topics. And we would like to reserve the last, I think we have about 10 minutes left in our session here today for questions from the audience as well. So Jen, maybe I'll call you back here and see if maybe any questions came in from the group during the course of the session here today.
Sure, thanks. Thanks so much, Errol, Jacques, and John. That was great. We did have a couple questions roll in. The first one comes from Rebecca, and again, these are all open questions. Nobody identified who they were specifically for, so feel free to jump in and take one. What are you seeing amongst the banks you work with for payment API capabilities?
Yes, I don't know if I could probably start on that one a little bit. I could, maybe give some context from both regions. I could say, and make a real generalized comment here too. It's it varies bank to bank, but in a very generalized sense, I think in the U.S. what we're seeing currently is a lot of banks beginning to offer payment API capabilities, but mainly for one-off payment initiation, right? I think I maybe mentioned this a bit during the course of the conversation as well. So, say you wanted to send instructions to initiate one Fedwire payment, typically you can do that via API. What you kind of can't do most of the time is send a batch payment. So you can't send instructions to initiate 300 payments within one single batch via an API, right? That's kind of where the limitation sits currently. And then more situationally, I think, we're also seeing real-time payment capabilities start to come online too, which are being offered through API. That's kind of the biggest advantage. I think when people talk about payment APIs, that's almost specifically they're talking about real-time payments and looking to leverage those instruments, which are definitely starting to come online in a lot of different regions where they're available, and definitely still bank by bank. And they have their own sets of challenges in terms of dollar thresholds and things like that for the value of the transaction you can execute through a real-time payment method. But that is definitely something to keep an eye on, I think, particularly in 2022. What I'm seeing from European banks, I don't know, Jack or Errol, you might have better input into this particular topic, but they're a little bit further along, it seems like, on the payment API capabilities. So there are a lot of banks in Northern Europe that we're seeing specifically that can offer full payment capabilities via API, which is nice. And for those reasons, we typically connect with those banking partners almost exclusively via API. So yeah, it kind of varies region to region a little bit. So I know that's not a great black and white answer, but that's sort of how.
The world is not black and white.
Yeah.
No, actually, as you said, Germany, maybe in the Europe space, yeah. So there are a lot of banks moving in that space, of course, and there are many APIs already. And maybe it's worth to say, we will see a lot of them, yes, but sometimes it's also a chicken and egg problem, because banks usually say, okay, there are specific innovations that we have in our payments. We want to offer it to APIs, right? And this specific innovation is not for free. Yeah, and so it's sometimes a battle, I would say, to a certain extent as well, because as a customer, you'd like to get the newest, fastest innovation, right? But from a bank, you want to basically get a return on your investment, because it's for a bank, it's an investment to offer APIs. It's an investment to get new capabilities out to the market. And but they, of course, they expect value to be created for a customer. And so this is more and more happening. And as long as, let's say, all the processes more and more become digitalized, and payments is let's say, an integral part of that. And I think it's just a matter of time when all this become seamless and fully integrated. And I think diversity will still be high. There will be not a single standard. And innovation will come not with standard. Innovation will come with diversity. And then if it gets mature, it becomes standard. So it's an opportunity for us, and it's for the whole market. Looking forward, of course, for that development in the market.
Great. Thank you so much, John and Errol. Okay, the next question, actually, it's more of a statement maybe you can respond to. This one comes in from Kapil. Even with Open API, the payment initiation and intraday cash applications will depend on your legacy ERP systems, whether they have that capability to do that. So I don't know if you have any comments in response to that statement.
Exactly. I mean, that's if you guys want to answer, but
yeah, no, I mean that's exactly it. It's probably a key topic that we maybe didn't touch on during the course of the call today. Is it's it's one that comes up a lot. Is like a lot of corporates ask, how do we even access these APIs? How do we build an API call to go out and pull in information real time from our banking partners? Is our ERP capable of doing that? And the answer is kind of no. I mean, there needs to be something in there that facilitates the actual building of that API call, whether it be a middleware of some sort, or utilizing something like a payments platform or treasury aggregator type software that's designed to do that for you. To construct those APIs call for you and pull that information in. So it's a very true statement, I would say. Even if you are able to pull in information via API, does the ultimate system that information is going to actually know what to do with that, or is it still expecting something that's a little bit more structured in the sense of like an actual file of some sort? And that's definitely a challenge that still needs to be solved in the market, I think, as well, and is a very, very, very good consideration when choosing your connectivity methods too.
Great. Thanks, John. Okay, I think that might answer a question that came in from Tori, so I'll jump over to Jeff. From your perspective, are there any alternatives to using the new ISO XML standard, or is it unavoidable?
Easy answer, Jacques.
I mean, it's avoidable. It always depends, but we see that even the MT, even Swift, is moving to ISO by 2025 for banks.
So it's not avoidable.
So it's not avoidable.
Yeah. And I think the other point, you don't want to avoid it. I don't think, you know what I mean? It's the other point too. It's meant to really simplify a lot of things that have been very complex in the payment world for a very long time. I mean, to take an extreme example here, if you're, for example, if you're initiating payments in Japan, you might have to reference all your beneficiary names in local language characters or katakana characters, right? Versus using Latin language characters. Versus, your payment initiation in the US would obviously all use Latin language characters. There's never historically been a format out there that can handle both of those types of topics, right, in one single payment initiation file. But a Payton 001 file can. I mean, that's literally the degree of standardization you can get by moving to this format. And that's an extreme case, but every other sort of piece of information that's typically communicated between corporate and their banks, same thing. You can do it in such a standardized way that the efficiencies that you're going to get from a business standpoint make it worth it, really, to adopt this format. So.
Great. We just have a couple more questions. The next one comes in from Christian. Provided low standardization of open APIs, wouldn't their further spread lead to even more mess? And there's another part to this question. Are there any initiatives in place internationally to standardize APIs?
So from the standardization perspective, yes, there are a lot of initiatives going on and making standard. But maybe the open API topic, when it comes to, let's say, PSD2 as an example in Europe, we are talking here specifically about APIs more in the domain of B2C, and this becomes open. There is a standard, there is a body behind, and so on and so forth. When it comes, so B2B is still quite a diverse situation. And there's not a, let's say, API-wise, there will be probably currently not a standards going on in that space. Probably more in the formats area, as we see in the ISO, and this will continue. APIs is quite new and quite dynamic these days. I doubt there will be sooner or later let's say, the standard for B2B payments where all banks will adopt, or let's say the majority of the banks will adopt. Certain, let's say, regulatory pressure may lead to certain standards, as we have seen in Europe, but this will take some time, I think. Yeah. So the world will become still, let's say, diverse and colorful, but with more capabilities and innovation, but far away from being a standard.
Great, thanks so much, Errol. The next question comes in from Antonia. The ISO XML looks quite technical. How would you assess the efforts needed for the implementation of the new standard?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple different ways you can go about it. I think I somewhat alluded to this during the course of the conversation. Is you can leverage actually a third-party, payments hub or treasury aggregation software to actually convert your legacy formats, your MTs, your BAIs, your your Nacha files, whatever it might be, into the XML standard for you, right? So that's one way you can take advantage of it. The other thing you can do is, so most ERP systems, or at least modern ones, so a lot of cloud ones have, if you're thinking about payment initiation type files, they have a way to use what's called the generic ISO XML structure for payment initiation. And so from that standpoint, it's actually a little bit easier, I think, to kind of, use a format like ISO XML for payment initiation in comparison to something that you might have to build from scratch, like a regional format or an MT format or something like that. But the complexity comes that, yes, the standard logic knows that I have to place all the different items within this payment file into certain segments, but it doesn't know what segments the banks are going to ultimately be expecting, right? That's probably where the complexity lies for corporates. But once again, this is something that can be solved through fintechs who, maintain essentially libraries of these formats that say exactly which segments are going to be necessary to communicate with HSBC in France versus BNP somewhere else, or whatever it might be, right? And ultimately we'll create that structure for you. But in just a very general sense, getting started with it is, I think the ERP systems are trying to make this plug and play for the corporates to some extent by using at least generic source files and schemas around ISO XML.
Maybe to add something, the jurisdictional and the whole settings change need always kind of requirement or adaptation from the ERP system or for corporate. And the main important aspect is that corporate always have to have themselves is to like, is it my core business? Do I have to care about that? Yes, but do I have to build resources upon that? And do I have to use corporate time and energy to focus on something that is not part of my core business? And then the answer will probably go in the direction that John say, use third party, that is their business model, and they will make the life easy for you. Because when the next change come, you will have to adjust it again. So it's make more sense to you. One will actually take care of these changes for you. That is the easy answer for me when it comes to format change and regulatory aspect in general.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you so much. And this last question is a follow-up question from Kapil, and this is the last question after this one, John. It's now handed back to you. Can you give some examples of prevalent middlewares? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that, or maybe we could take that one off.
We could. I mean, we could, yeah, probably name drop a few middlewares here if you guys want to. So I mean, there's you know, Dell Boomi is a common one that I think we see a lot of organizations using as a middleware for integrations. You know, there's things like Jitterbit. I'm trying to think of some of the other names, but you know, there's also, I guess if we're talking about specifically middlewares to facilitate API-based communication, there's also Treasury. You know, there's the bank aggregation softwares, payments hubs. You know, softwares that fit into these criteria as well that can also do that for you, right? Which in a lot of cases, you know, somebody brought up a great point about, hey, the more APIs there are, it does not just mean there's a big mess out there to deal with. And that's exactly the problem that these fintechs are looking to solve, is they want the mess, right? So that they can present it to you in a way that's really simple. So, you know, all the different API protocols, that's the job of the fintech, so to speak, to be able to, you know, navigate, right? That's what they specialize in. They build API calls all day long. You know, us as an example of that, we work with APIs, you know, constantly. And so we understand the different variables there very, very well. And we can build those kind of connections out to banks pretty quickly. But the presentation back to the corporate can still be one connection, you know, whether it be API based, or if you're not ready to take advantage of APIs quite yet, something that's more file based, whatever it might be that's right for your situation, right? So yeah, I mean, when we talk about middleware, I just think about, in general, something that can simplify that whole string of communications and make it very digestible from a business process standpoint. So those are probably some good examples I can give from that respect.
Thank you so much, John. That's the end of the Q&A, and I'll hand it back to you.
All right, perfect. Thanks, everybody. I mean, a lot of great questions coming in there. So it seems like everybody really was receptive to the topics we were discussing during the course of the presentation today. Jacques, Errol, thank you guys very much for joining and sharing all your insights. I definitely, you know, enjoyed the conversation very, very much. So, and if anybody is interested in sort of continuing conversation on any of these particular topics, feel free to reach out to us. I think our contact information was provided with the registration link, or also feel free to connect on LinkedIn. So, but otherwise, you know, thanks again, everybody, for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.